everyone, welcome to the December 15th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski, and we are looking ahead to Saturday's card at Oaklawn Park. Yep, we're doing another late pick 5 sequence at Oaklawn, races 6 through 10 on Saturday. The feature race there in Hot Springs, Arkansas is the Tinsel Stakes for the older horses, going 1 1/8 on the dirt. Craig and I already did a stakes preview of that race that you can check out on the Daily Racing Form YouTube channel, in addition to a couple of other stakes races, one at Gulfstream, one at Aqueduct for this past weekend. But we're going to take a look at the surrounding races in this pick 5 sequence, including 2 maiden races and 2 allowance races that surround this Tinsel Stakes at Oaklawn on Saturday. The maiden races, one for the 2-year-olds, one for the 3-year-olds. Allowance races, there's an open company optional claimer, and then an Arkansas bred allowance race that ends the day. I know Craig always loves to handicap those, especially when they draw full fields. So not the easiest sequence to handicap at Oaklawn, Craig. I know we kind of felt that way about last week's sequence. I don't think either of us thought it was going to get quite as complicated as it turned out to be. I forget exactly how much it paid, but I know it was a pretty big score for anybody who was able to string together those pair of 20-1 winners and the 10-1 shot that came through. We'll see if it's quite as big balloons on this Saturday.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say the potential is there because I'm starting to question my sanity agreeing to handicap these Oaklawn cards for a pick 5 because they are quite the puzzle. Just we don't get a lot of tracks where we get full fields on dirt races like this, big purses, and just a really tough sequence. But I joke because I do enjoy handicapping these races. It's just there's nothing easy about them.
Yeah, I think the big difference between this week's sequence and last week's sequence is, at least in last week's sequence, I knew we kind of agreed that it felt like there were a few favorites that you could either gravitate towards or take a stand against, but you kind of knew that there were a couple horses in the sequence that were going to take a lot of money. In this sequence, it's kind of hard to identify those horses. Going through, I mean, I know there are a couple, maybe 2-1 shots or horses that are the favorites on the morning line, but I don't have a strong feel for how these races are going to get bet. And it's hard to really zero in on a horse that you want to key the sequence around either positively or negatively. So I kind of felt handicapping these races, Craig, like they were just a series of races where my inclination was to spread a little bit. Hopefully we can spread with some prices, but those are difficult tickets to put together. Probably the easiest race to handicap on the sequence is the stakes race that we already shared some feelings about. And I don't think we were necessarily on the exact same page there. So it's not going to be an easy ticket to put together.
No, for sure. And that's the issue. I mean, yeah, you can handicap. And I came with the same thing. Every race I had 3, 4, even 5 horses I was considering. And when you're playing a pick 5, that can get expensive real quick, almost to the point where it's unplayable. So it just comes down to having to have a few opinions. And we'll see as we talk through these if any of these solidify for me.
Well, let's begin with race 6, which kicks off this pick 5 sequence. It is a 2-year-old maiden special weight event for the fillies, going 6 furlongs on the dirt, of course. There is a little bit of rain predicted at Oaklawn Park Friday into Saturday. I think last I looked, it was like 0.3 inches. Probably the track is going to be fast by the time they run this Saturday card, but just wanted to put that out there as we go into this sequence. And it does feel like the 2 horses drawn towards the outside, Craig, are probably where the public is going to go here. The number 9, Cleopatra Celine, and especially the number 10, Bang Bang Fury, who's coming out of a couple of races at Churchill Downs where it feels like she probably faced some better horses. This Donnie von Hiemel trainee ran into a couple of Brad Cox trained winners in West Sunset and West Omaha. West Sunset, the winner of her debut, did come back to win an allowance race impressively before bombing in the Goldenrod. And then last time out, felt like she faced a pretty good horse in West Omaha, who was a pretty convincing winner of that race. She might just be getting a little bit of class relief here. Does have to overcome a wide draw, but watching back her last couple of races, I felt like she actually ran pretty well in both starts.
Yeah, I have no problem with her. Her speed figures fit in here. She's running the 80s a couple times, which is a good figure for this field. It's not a race we have a race rating because there's so many first time starters, but she's fine. Same goes for the 9. She actually comes out of a very strong race as well, losing to a different Brad Cox horse, Denim and Pearls, a horse who has since come back to win with a much improved speed figure. And it's a race where all the horses almost have come back and run better figures. So especially the ones that ran well that day. So I am trying to narrow it down to these two because you got to narrow down somewhere. I do think there's a couple other horses worth discussing. It's just going to come down to going to come down to how much I want to spend on the ticket. For one, the 2 horse Tale of Labi ran decent the first time for Chris Hartman. I don't know what happened last time, just a complete flop at 5-2, but he's bringing her right back in probably 3 or 4 weeks, I guess it is. So I guess you have to take that as a good sign. And one other I wanted to talk about. Oh, the 6 horse Spiritual Lady. Not sure where the early speed came from last time. That was a filly who had basically shown very little in 3 starts, 2 of them on the turf, but they dropped her into a maiden claimer, and I kind of put that in air quotes because it was 100,000 maiden claimer at Churchill, and she showed real speed, and often that's a good sign that horses are waking up. Her TimeformUS adjusted speed figure is decent, so if she's going to be a big price, she's one I could see using as a backup.
Yeah, and I think the problem with those two horses is that they're in the same race because it feels like they both have similar running styles. They want to be up front, and they've each encountered some tough pace situations in their prior starts. Tale of La Bee, as you said, ran really well in the debut. I'd like her a lot in this race if she were coming in off that performance. It's hard for me to get past the last race, though. I know it was a tougher field. She had faced one of those auction restricted maiden races on debut and then stepped up into open company last time, but pace wasn't that fast. The pace actually kind of held together, and she just went backwards. I have trouble excusing that performance a little bit, and now she's stretching back out to the 6 furlongs. She's not one that I preferred in here, and I felt kind of the same way about Spiritual Lady, especially with that other speed in here. Felt like she could face another difficult situation. It was a maiden claiming race that she's coming out of. I know it was $100,000 maiden claimer, but just feels like there are probably horses in this race that have a little more upside than she does. And you mentioned the number 9, Cleopatra Celine, Craig, who I did want to also talk about a little bit. Yeah, you're right. That last race was strong. Demon Pearl is coming back to win a fast allowance race. I believe we talked about that one on the Pace Cast. And other horses coming out of that October 21st Keeneland maiden race have since improved their speed figures. Cleopatra Celine was a huge price that day, went off at 60-1 and almost caused the upset. Probably was her own worst enemy because she looked a little bit green through the stretch that day. It seemed like she was trying to lug in a bit under Vincent Cheminot. Just feels like a horse that is moving forward. And if one of these two horses drawn towards the outside, Cleopatra Celine and Bang Bang Fury, is going to take a big step forward in this race, I'd probably lean a little bit more towards Cleopatra Celine just because it feels like she's got a little bit of that unprofessionalism that she still has to get over, and maybe she takes that next step forward in this third career start. If I was trying to beat either of these two horses, Craig, I'd be looking at first time starters in this race. Now, none of the firsters are going out for barns that you necessarily would identify as big debut outfits or horses that are necessarily known for first out success. I will say with the number 7 Midshipman's Dance, I don't have the stats right in front of me because she's not listed as being trained by Robertina Diodoro, but I know that Robertina Diodoro has decent stats with first time starters, just having looked them up in the past. And obviously she's being trained by the assistant here, Sean Williams. But this horse was prepared at Remington Park. Seems like she sports a decent series of workouts coming into this race. Midshipman is a 13% debut sire, and there's pedigree on the dam side. The dam actually won the Remington Park Oaks with a 92 buyer, produced a horse that was decent, albeit on the turf and synthetic and Demogorgon, but at least there's some pedigree here. Gets a live rider in Christian Torres, and if there's a first-time starter that ends up being live in this race, I think Midshipman's Dance is a little bit interesting. There are a couple of other firsters I wanted to mention, but were you viewing the firsters as ones that you would want to use in this race, or considering how the rest of the sequence looks, did you kind of want to try to keep this one narrow?
Yeah, mostly I think I'm going to stick to the 9 and 10. Of the firsters, I preferred the 7. As you said, it was kind of hard to get information because Diodoro is, you can't really look him up in Formulator right now as he doesn't have anybody running. The others, I'm curious to see which they had because there wasn't a lot of data. They're both trained by the same guy. He's 1 for 12, but the one winner was a bomb. Both of these are going to be big prices. So I'm always interested to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, and the other firsters that I wanted to mention were the number 8, the big Calhouna, who the sire Maximus Mischief is a 22% debut sire in his first crop. So no surprise, as a son of Into Mischief, this horse is really getting some first out success with his progeny that have hit the track this year. And I also found it interesting looking at the dam side of the big Calhouna that he's a half to a horse named Chase Tracker, who actually won his career debut, raced a bunch of times, but the best speed figure that he ever ran in terms of the buyers was that career debut effort. And then he kind of regressed after that. And actually, another of the Dam's foals was also a debut winner, and she's only had limited production. So I think it's interesting that this horse seems like he has a win early pedigree, and she's been working out pretty fast at the Churchill Downs Training Center. I was looking up some of the days that she achieved those bullet 47 and 1 drills, and they were the fastest of the day pretty clearly. Gets a live rider in Julian Leperoux for a low profile barn. So I think that one's pretty interesting. And there are also a couple of firsters in here for a barn that I'm not that familiar with, Michael Hewitt. It seems like Catholic Sue is the one that probably want. Feels like these two probably work together on at least one occasion. But Catholic Sue sports the stronger workouts coming into this race. There's some pedigree on the dam side, especially if you look at the second generation, the dams that have to Dwyer winner Mint Lane, as well as the grade 1 placed Sister Girl Blues. So, I mean, Craig, it's not like I think that the 9 and the 10 are so formidable that I'm going to be surprised if a first time starter pops up and runs an 85 or 90 TimeformUS speed figure and beats them in this spot. And I feel like there are some interesting places to go. So I wanted to keep an open mind to this race because I'm not going to be shocked when a horse makes its debut and pays $20 in this kind of race.
Yeah, the 9 and 10 are two fillies who, I mean, it's not like they have overwhelming past performance lines that make you jump out and think, oh, they you just have to single. It's just it's such a tough sequence. The good news is we're going to get to see the betting in this race, and even the 7th race, which is a maiden race. You can check the double probables and maybe at least get somewhat of a clue on how it's going to be bet. But yeah, this one's pretty tough for me. The 7 I kind of overlooked. I mean, the 8 because of the low profile connections. They just don't win very much, but there was certainly a lot to see in the workouts.
Let's move on to race 7. It is a maiden special weight event going 6 furlongs. This one for the 3-year-olds, though. So horses that have a little more experience, though we do have a first-time starter in this race that I think we do need to talk about, the number 3 Raging, going out for the Brad Cox barn. And maybe that's where we should start, Craig, because Brad Cox just always takes a ton of money in these Oaklawn races. And while he might be bad value on the win end, sometimes these horses typically run. I mean, rare is the Brad Cox horse that just completely doesn't show up. So I think you have to at least be scared of a horse like the number 3 Raging. But first time out at Oaklawn and dirt sprints, not historically been the best move for Brad Cox, and really first time out in dirt sprints in general. These horses just generally get over bet. With the stat that I just cited specifically at Oaklawn, he's 5 for 44, 11% with a 90-cent ROI on a $2 wager. So not great stats for this barn, but does feel like there's some win early pedigree here being by Practical Joke, 15% debut sire. Obviously, this horse has had some issues debuting when he's almost turning 4 years old, but seems like there are some pretty quick workouts at Turfway Park. So I'm not going to be surprised when this one is live.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not very high on this horse, and your stat makes that even more so. I had looked up just how he does. I mean, obviously wins a lot with maidens first time out, but this is a 3-year-old at the very end of his 3-year-old season. So you have to think there were some issues. And I looked up different stats, which are actually even better than yours, but still not good. in this scenario with 3-year-old males, he wins 17%, but the ROI is a pretty miserly 1.3. So it's just this horse is going to be such negative value for me. I'm going to have trouble putting them on the tickets. It's going to be one of those scenarios. If he beats me, he beats me. It's a tough sequence, and one I'm going to need to use a lot of horses. So if he wins at what'll probably be a fairly short price, I guess I'll be out.
Yeah, I mean, I would be way more willing to just chuck this horse if not for those workouts, Craig. And it's kind of a double-edged sword because the workouts are going to mean this horse takes money, unlike the kind of Brad Cox horse that would fly under the radar. But specifically that November 25th work at Turfway, which was a gate work going 59-2. That was the fastest of the 49 workouts that day, going 4 furlongs by almost a full second, 4/5 of a second. So it feels like this horse might be okay, but obviously the evidence is limited, and those stats say that you want to be a little skeptical of this guy. If you're looking at experience, I think that you're probably going to gravitate first towards the number 7, Mr. Keating, who was live when he made his debut at Keeneland back in April. I think we actually did that sequence on the forecast all the way back then. And this horse almost got up. It was a race that mostly held together towards the front. And I think another first-time starter going up for the Brad Cox barn, Class Actor, won that race. But Mr. Keating really got rolling in the final stages to just miss that day. They stretched him right out in his second start, going a mile and a 16th. Maybe it was asking a little bit too much. It felt like the distance got to him a little bit at the end. That was a race that mostly held together in terms of the pace. A long shot won that race, wiring the field. But I thought Mr. Keating ran fine. Been off for a long time, but Norm Cassie has good stats coming off these kinds of layoffs. I looked up 150 to 300 days on the dirt. He's 6 for 21, 376 ROI. So it kind of feels like Mr. Keating is probably the horse to beat, but he might have to take a slight step forward.
Yeah, he is another 3-year-old. We last saw him in June, and he has speed figures. That's part of why I'm against raging. Is there's some pretty strong figures among this group. Mr. Keating is among them. Uh, like you said, you quoted the one stat. I found another off of these type of layoffs with maidens. It's a pretty limited sample, but Cassie is 3 for 10 with a 5.78 ROI, so he can certainly win with these kind of horses. So I've got no issue with him. He cuts back to a sprint here, which he did fine in his debut. So he will definitely be on my tickets. Another horse I'm very interested in is the horse just who is inside Excellent Men. Coming in for David Jacobson, shipping in from the East Coast, ran at Aqueduct last time, so I'm sure you're familiar with him. Ran a 98 speed figure that day, and the one thing that really stuck out to me is David Jacobson's doing well when he ships into Oaklawn. We saw it last year, and I believe he's already 2 for 2 at the meet this year, and this horse just fits. So I have a feeling he could get overlooked a little bit.
Yeah, he's a funny horse. Excellent Men. If you have not seen the replay of his race 2 back at Laurel, it is definitely worth watching. He just got one of the craziest rides I've ever seen. It probably was partly this horse. I also don't know what the rider was doing to react to the horse's antics. I mean, he basically was just, it looked like the rider was just in a reclined position for almost the entire race as he was trying to prevent this horse from getting out around the far turn. And I mean, looked like he was going to pull up for about a good quarter mile around the bend. And then once they straightened out, he actually started riding again and got up for second that day. I don't think he was facing a very good field at Laurel 2 back. He did face a slightly tougher group at Aqueduct last time. That's a race that unfortunately there's no access to the replay for because there was a spill for another Jacobson horse in that race. But the winner savings rate, he's running back at Aqueduct on Saturday, I believe, against an NYX allowance group. I don't know if that's going off before or after this race. I forget exactly the post times. Some other runbacks from that race have been a mixed bag. Logan Required really regressed in his next start. I think the 4th place finisher improved. So not sure what to make of it. I didn't love this horse's effort that day. So we'll see what we got from him. I mean, Craig, the horse that kind of you want to go to based on speed figures is the number 8, Wicked Again, who's got nothing but triple-digit TimeformUS speed figures coming into this on the dirt. I'm not going to fault him for his last race when he ran into a horse, Mullion, who I don't know why. I guess we didn't talk about that race on the Pacecast because it was Breeders' Cup week, Craig. But I mean, that's a horse that we probably should not have ignored that ran on Breeders' Cup week. Mullion, who won by 10 lengths and got a 123 Timeform US speed figure. I think he's the full brother to Mandaloon. That looks like he could be one of the top older horses next year based on that performance. So no disgrace losing to that horse, but he's got prior races sprinting that put him right in the mix. I guess you do wonder a little bit if he's developing that reputation as being a bit of a disappointment or a career maiden type because he's lost a number of times at short prices, but he has run into some pretty good horses along the way.
He has, and as you said, he has the speed figures. My one concern is he just doesn't have a lot of speed. He showed some in his debut, but he's always up close. But the turn back worries me a little bit. He would need some pace, I think, but he's certainly not out of the question, as you mentioned too. He's kind of getting that reputation for losing at low prices. He's done it, I think, at least 3 times where he's been 2-1 or less and been beaten. So he's a bit of a mixed bag for me. He's probably going to be a little bit of a price because, as you said, the last couple races look bad when you just look at the running line because he's beaten so far. But there were big gaps in those races, and he lost to some good horses. So he's a bit of a toss up for me. Another one that's kind of along the same vein is just to his outside in Pineland. The 9 horse, he certainly has speed figures that could win. When you look at him in Timeform US, you see him on the lead in blue fractions, and he kind of gives it up late. So maybe you think he's not as good as the running lines look, but the one thing I note is he's turning back. He had run at 7 and 7.5, and despite the breeding, which says he should like going longer, maybe he's just a horse who doesn't want to go far, and the 6 could help him.
Yeah, my problem with Pineland is just those blue color coded fractions in his last couple of races. I know he comes out of a fast race at Churchill going to 7.5 furlongs, but that was 7.5 furlongs. He got to the lead going a longer distance, almost a mile, and now he's cutting back to 6 furlongs. I just wonder if he possesses the natural speed to get forward in a race where it feels like some others want to get forward position, maybe not horses that we're necessarily viewing as win contenders, but even horses like the number 1, Schreber's Secret, or the number 5, who's a huge price in this race. They're going to have speed in here, and I wonder a little bit about the trip for a horse like Pineland, though I respect the job that Lindsay Schultz does. She's the kind of trainer that can send out prices and get them to run well. So I don't know how big of a price this horse is going to be, but I kind of had mixed feelings about him. And just to wrap up Wicked again, I'm kind of taking the positive view of him, Craig, because I don't know if this horse really wanted to go longer. A mile just doesn't seem right. 7 furlongs, even probably stretching it a little bit. He's the full brother to Wicked Halo, who's pretty much a confirmed 6 furlong sprinter. So I like this horse turning back. And I wonder if he's just been in a series of tough spots and he's getting some subtle class relief here. I could also say the same thing about a horse I don't trust as much, but it's going to be a price in this race. And in the number 2, Miller's Right, coming off a layoff, so that's a big question mark. But if you kind of look at the fields this horse has been in, I mean, Tappett's Conquest, Rocket Can, Winter's Lion, Sun Thunder, Lark's Mischief, who recently ran a 99 buyer at Churchill Downs. I mean, this horse has been in maiden races that have been won by nothing but good horses. And yeah, he was beaten a long way in most of those, but felt like he was figuring it out at the beginning of this year. The layoff is a big concern, but he's going to be a big price in this race. And he's the kind of horse I could throw on as a B or a C in a pick 5 ticket. But this is the problem. These races, as you start to look at them more, they look more and more interesting. And you kind of want to keep throwing horses onto your tickets in this kind of sequence. And it ends up getting really bloated and expensive.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why in the end, I'm probably going to focus on the 6 and the 7. They would be the A's for me. The 8 would probably be a B or a C. And that's about it. I mean, it's somewhere you have to draw the line and just accept that if some of the other horses that you know could beat you, so be it. I mean, that's racing, but just looking for a little value, trying to beat the number 3 Raging. Before we leave this one, I did want to ask you, you mentioned his workouts. Does it matter to you that they came over synthetic? I'm not near as big of a workout guy as you are, but do you think that automatically I mean, I know you don't think it automatically translates to dirt, but how much do you consider the surface?
Personally, I don't care so much which surface horses are training on. I care that Brad Cox thinks he's a dirt horse and is running him on the dirt. I mean, he's at Turfway, shows a bunch of fast workouts at Turfway. He has a stable at Turfway, and he's shipping him to Oaklawn to run. I think that's all that I really need to know for a trainer like Brad Cox. Let's move on to race 8. It is an optional claiming 50,000, non-winners of 2 other than the allowance condition, going 6 furlongs. And well, things don't get much easier here, Craig. We do at least not have a full field. There's only 10 runners in this race, so fewer that we can use. But it's another race where I just had trouble finding the center or finding the horse to beat in here. I mean, I know that the favorite on the morning line, I believe, is the number 4 Nautical Star. And I guess this horse ran well in that Gallant Bob 2 back behind Damon's Mound, who's a really nice 3-year-old. Didn't run as well in that Steel Valley sprint at Mahoning Valley last time, but it bothers me a little bit, Craig, that this horse's 2 best races have come over sloppy sealed tracks.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's not even close, really. His other races just don't stack up at all. He hasn't done much running. So, unless the rain comes, like you said, and I should mention it's raining here in Oklahoma City a little today. Usually, Oaklawn's about a day behind, but I don't think we're supposed to get much. As you said, it's supposed to clear up. So, if you're betting on a fast track, I'm just not sure I would trust Nautical Star at all.
And clearly, these owners, the ownership group, I mean, they like to use high percentage trainers. I mean, just looking at, I believe this is the owner of White Abario and other top horses. They purchased this horse privately over the springtime to run in the Florida Derby. That seemed like a crazy move at the time. But since they've turned this horse back to running some sprint races and moving from the Saffie Joseph barn to Chris Hartman, Chris Hartman does great at Oaklawn, obviously. First off, a trainer switch in dirt sprints. Surprisingly, not a good move for Chris Hartman. He's really much more of a claiming trainer, and I like to make that distinction between guys that do well or gals that do well off the claim versus a trainer switch. And off a trainer switch in dirt sprints, he's 7 for 55, just 13% win rate with a 96-cent ROI. So I'm not viewing this necessarily as a positive move for Nautical Star, even though he might be getting a little bit of class relief here. And I wanted to keep an open mind to some other horses, Craig. I wish that there was a little more obvious pace in this race, because the pace scenario is really difficult to read. It's not like there are confirmed front runners. I mean, the horses that are shown on the lead in the pace projector, they're not exactly confirmed speed types. I mean, even a horse like the number 10 Vulcan, who looks like potentially the fastest of them all early. I mean, he got a crazy trip last time where he didn't make the lead and then looks like he bolted on the far turn. I mean, just reacted really badly to, I guess, whatever was outside of him that day. So he's a little unreliable coming off that performance, even to be forward in here. So I don't know exactly what we're going to get from the pace standpoint, but if pace does develop, I think that the number 5 Shooter Shoot just makes a lot of sense in this race, because he's coming out of a race that was basically a stakes event compared to this, won by Traegar with the very promising Giant Mischief finishing second that day, and just go through that field and just horse after horse is of a higher quality than what he's meeting in this spot. And also, he was off a little bit towards the back of the pack that day. Got I wouldn't say he was steady, but just wound up a little further back than you would have expected him to be, and was running on a little bit at the end. He's got plenty of prior races that put him in the mix, and I don't mind him turning back a bit to 6 furlongs, even though he's primarily gone longer this year. He's just a horse that probably does need a little bit of a setup.
Yeah, I would agree. He comes out of a race where he got a nice speed figure of 114. It does have that P notation for blue fractions, which didn't give him any help that day as a horse who, as you said, was near the back of the pack. I'm not suspect of that fig, as all 2 horses have come back to run and actually improved their speed figure off of it. So I actually think Shooter Shoot probably is the horse to beat. I would have him on my tickets if I play the sequence. There are a couple other horses I wanted to mention that I'm interested in who might be bigger prices and offer some value. I'll start with the 2 Count de Monet. I assume that's how we say that, from that Mel Brooks movie from way back. But I like that he's a horse. He's coming off a long layoff for Tom Swearingen. he started his career razor sharp, winning the Advent Stakes here at Oaklawn as a 2 year old, and then he just kind of tailed off and didn't do much running. But after those 3 wins, he comes in off a layoff. I always judge that similar as when they come off the bench as a first time starter. And when I looked up the trainer stats, he does very well in this situation. There's not a ton of them, but he's 3 for 9 with just a huge ROI. Now that's inflated because he had 147, the one shot win. So I'm going to take that with a little bit of grain of salt, but it tells me he can get a horse ready off the bench, and this horse probably does his best running fresh, and he's certainly coming in fresh off the 200 plus day layoff. So he was one. The other one's even a bigger price. That's XL. He's a horse who comes in with probably my favorite pattern I look for in all of racing, and that's third off the layoff, improving speed figures, but not quite back to his top speed figures. He ran a 104 last time. He did that in a race here at Remington Park. It was only a 4-horse field, but it was a pretty strong allowance race. It was a race that was a complete merry-go-round. He basically had no chance to catch the winner. But when I watch it, he ran fine in there. He just got a little tired late, and I think he's going to be much better third off the layoff. And to make the pattern even better, when I looked up the trainer and formulator, he actually does very well third off this kind of layoff, 180 days plus, winning at 23% with a 2.27 ROI per $2 bet. So I'm really interested in XL in here.
Yeah, there are a lot of ways to go in this race. I was not nearly as positive on those two horses. To me, I'm not going to talk anybody off a price in this race, and XL in particular is going to be a huge price. To me, they're a little bit just one number horses, and I have trouble trusting those types a little bit. I mean, if you take out Count de Monet's Advent Stakes, he's supposed to be like 50-1 in this race. I know that he's a 3-year-old and maybe he can improve a little bit, but even that Advent, when you look that field up again, it hasn't necessarily aged that well. So I wonder if he really stacks up against this field. I also don't think he's going to be 6-1. He's 6-1 on the morning line. I mean, he's supposed to be no lower than 12-1, at least I view in this race. And XL, yeah, he ran that big faker at Oaklawn back in May of last year. The horses that did well in that race really haven't run back to that number since then. Some others that finished behind have, but it was just kind of one of those races that produced an odd result. So I don't know what to make of it. He did face some good horses prior to that, and he's got speed. So I'm not going to talk anybody off a 20-1 shot, but he wasn't necessarily for me in this race. That said, it's not like I have a strong feeling that's pulling me towards anybody. I mean, the horses that I think are somewhat interesting would be the number 1, Navy Seal. Now, the negative with him is he's another closer in a race where I think the pace is a little murky, but he's got nothing but speed figures that put him in the mix in this race. And maybe some will hold it against him that he's an Arkansas bred, that he's competed in a lot of state bred races prior to this when he's run at Oaklawn. But he ran an N1X optional claiming race at Oaklawn back in April of last year and finished pretty well to be second, actually finishing ahead of Spend Benjamins, who came back to win a similar optional claiming allowance race in last week's Pick 5 sequence. And since then, he's run at Hawthorne, but has kept pretty good company. When you look at the race ratings of his last couple of races, they stack up very favorably to today's race rating. And I think a lot of people are going to view him as just coming out of bad races. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. And also watching his last race, he was really rolling at the end, ran out of ground, but was making a good run in that race. Now he's gotten a freshening, going out for a barn that is definitely not going to attract support. And I just think he's a little interesting at a price in this race because I don't think that this is as strong an N2X allowance as we would be accustomed to seeing at Oaklawn as we get deeper into the meet, where these races, draw the Skellies of the world, or horses that are going to end up in stakes races eventually. I don't know if that's necessarily the case in this particular race. So I want to keep an open mind to some horses that haven't necessarily proven it at the level yet. And another horse that I want to mention that's kind of a wild card in this race is the number 9 Armagnac. what do you do with this guy? Ran in the Preakness Stakes back in 2022. Went back and forth between the Tim Yakteen and Bob Baffert barns that year, with accounting for the Churchill Downs Baffert ban. Was put up for sale at the Keeneland Horses of Racing Age sale after that April race in the Kona Gold. Was an RNA for 140,000, but obviously changed hands subsequently because now he's going out for different owners. And with Dwayne Lucas, is he really a sprinter? I don't know. His full sibling is a horse named 12th Labor, who is pretty much a confirmed dirt sprinter. I know they've gone longer with him for much of his career, but he does have some tactical speed, and there was quality here at one point. Dwayne Lucas, not a trainer that has great stats in this situation, but he's the kind of trainer that doesn't have great stats really doing anything. So I don't know what to really make of that. And he's a horse that's just kind of a wild card. I'm not going to be surprised when he does well in here because you know that he's got that back class.
Yeah, I considered him for a while. He actually led that Preakness for a pretty long way, more than half the race before giving it up. But that was a while ago. I'm the same. I looked up those Lucas stats. They're bad. But like you said, most of his stats are bad because he likes to run his horses and he takes shots. So I'm not going to hold that against him. I won't be shocked if he wins. I definitely considered Navy SEAL. I saw he just has no speed. That kind of scared me off him a little bit. The one thing I did want to say about the pace, and not just this race, but in general, is we've seen a lot of races at Oaklawn so far this meet that look like they don't have a lot of speed. I don't know if it's the purses. I don't know if it's the riding colony. Very few are actually turning out that way. It just seems like it's a much more aggressive riding colony. So I'm a little less leery to bet closers here, at least right now at this time of the meet, that I am usually, because the riders just seem intent on setting fast paces and you just aren't getting away with a lot of easy leads so far.
Yeah, Craig, I like the way that you framed that. I noticed the same thing last week. I didn't want to frame it as a track bias because we've only had a couple days of the meet so far. I mean, it's very early on, but it did feel like there were a lot of closers winning last week. So I think that's something you want to keep an eye on. And, a horse that neither of us mentioned that I think is going to take money in this race that I expect you're also against, Craig, is the number 8 Stayed In for Half, who I feel like he'll be at relatively short price in here, going out for the Steve Asmussen barn and showing some flashy speed figures. When he won that race on the dirt at Remington back in August, I mean, he could not have gotten a more favorable setup that day. And he's run okay since then, switching between dirt and turf, but I'm not projecting him to be the controlling speed in here. And I think he kind of needs that situation to be at his best. And he's just not for me as a horse that looks a little bit obvious on paper.
No, I agree with that. As you said, I don't particularly care for him. I've seen him run here at Remington. That was the easiest win you'll ever get for a horse. It was probably a track that was speed biased that day he won on dirt. The one time he faced really good horses here at Remington, he got involved in the speed duel and pretty much got buried that day, running near the back of the pack. So I just don't see a way he gets to the winner's circle. I mean, I won't be shocked he has the speed figures to do it, but I think even though that's in the toughest N2X we're ever going to see, I still think it's tougher than what he's been facing.
Let's move on to the stakes, the Tinsel Stakes, race 9, going a mile and an eighth on the dirt. As I said, Craig and I already did a stakes preview of this race. If you want to check out our thoughts on every runner on DRF's YouTube channel, we'll probably condense it a little bit right here, Craig. I think that the points that we agree about in this race are that the pace here could heat up, kind of along the lines of what you were saying. Feels like there are a few horses that want to be forward, and I expect the riders of all of these horses to try to go forward, especially in the case of the number 2 Strong Quality, who it's kind of confirmed at this point, doesn't really want to pass horses. He wants to do his running on the front end. And Speed Bias, similar thing. I mean, he definitely doesn't want to pass horses. He sort of has shown a tendency to let horses pass him, at least in the late stages of a race. He does his best running on the front end as well. They're both strong contenders in here. They probably come in with the best speed figures of anybody. But given the presence of each of them, as well as the number 6 Ardenwood, who comes in off a couple of gate-to-wire victories, I could see this pace being at least somewhat competitive.
I mentioned on that preview that when we do the flags for the hot pace or the favors early, this one came up just a point short. Maybe the 7-horse field hurt it a little. Like if it had drawn another horse or two, it would definitely have the red flag. But I too think it's going to be a pretty quick pace just because I don't think those horses have a lot of other options, as you say. And they are putting up $200,000 for this listed stake. So it's not your typical listed stake. It's we're seeing more of that these days, but I suspect we're going to see some pretty ambitious and determined rides to get to the front end. And that's why I landed on Dennington as my top pick. I actually like him stretching back out to the mile and an eighth. He has good speed figures. He gets a good post position when you think there's going to be a speed duel. He should have no problem watching what develops, tucking in inside. So he would be my top pick in here. There are a couple others that I like as well, but I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, Dennington is a tough horse for me to warm up to. I'm kind of harping on this a little bit that, I mean, he's had 13 starts this year, and he's been in the exact three of those 13 times, and all three of those times are when he used Lasix. Can't use Lasix in this race. Ken McPeak is one of those trainers that has bad numbers with horses coming off Lasix, and I worry about that a little bit, that his recent form, at least in the last couple of allowance races, is just a little bit dressed up, and I thought he got the right pace scenario last time, but he's probably going to get it again here. We'll see if the mile and an eighth works for him. I wasn't as thrilled with him as Craig is, but I get the case for him, especially the way that this race could play out. I went in a different direction. I like the three, Seize the Night, quite a bit in this race. This horse might get dismissed by some because of form that looks a little bit inconsistent, but when you start to pick apart his races, he's had legitimate excuses on a number of occasions. I mean, going back to Ellis Park this summer, when you watch the trips of a few of those races, he was not on the right part of the track a number of times. I mean, in that Hampshire Stakes, he was chasing towards the outside, trying to make up ground in a race that was dominated towards the front end. The race in August after that, again, a wide trip, a race dominated by a rail runner. Then he went to the ACAC at Churchill Downs after being switched into a new barn. No pace to close into that day. I'm not going to hold out performance against him. And he switched to turf last time, first time ever on the turf. Actually ran pretty well against some really good horses in Ocean Atlantique and Churchtown, as well as Win From Within. I mean, the kinds of horses that can throw down high, 120 plus TimeformUS speed figures or close to it. And I think that the number that Seize the Night earned that day is legitimate. I don't mind him going back to the dirt here because I do think he's a little bit more of a dirt horse. This trainer, people might not be familiar with, Jade Cunningham. She is a former assistant to Dallas Stewart. I know that the Willis Horton estate, they've given her some horses to start out. I think Dewey Lucas was a supporter of hers. So I think she's got a pretty good horse here. And I think that Seize the Night fits this race really well. The 9 furlongs, I believe it's going to work for him. He won going 2 turns at Oaklawn last year, actually beating Speed Bias back in April. So I like him in this spot. We'll see if the 9 to 2 morning line holds up. I could actually see him drifting up a little bit from that. So he's the one that I wanted to key on in this race.
Yeah, and I said I liked a couple other horses. I actually only like one other horse, and it was him. I had him pick second, and it's for all the reasons you mentioned, so I won't rehash that. I did want to talk a little bit about the speed horses. If I was going to use one, it would be the 2 Strong Quality. I just trust him more. I've seen Speed Bias give it up late way too many times. I think Speed Bias might actually wind up going off the favorite in here. I guess we'll see, but I'm still leery of Strong Quality as well. Just the fact that he's going to face some pressure. And I don't put a whole lot of stock in that 121 TimeformUS speed figure he ran last time because it came in and off the turf race. He was never challenged at any point. The horse in behind him, Johnny's Fireball, is basically just nothing. He's always been a turf horse. Or his best races have been on turf, I should say. And it just seemed like more of a paid workout once that one came off the turf at Churchill.
Yeah, I think it's possible that Strong Quality has gotten that good because he was a really good dirt horse prior to going to the turf. I mean, he was not necessarily winning some optional claiming and allowance races, but running well against good horses, and obviously one that was crying out for distance. So, I mean, I like the mile and an eighth for him, and maybe just running on the turf just showed that he was improving over time, not necessarily really taking to the turf that well. So I think it's possible that he took the step forward to run the 121 last time. But like you said, he got a perfect situation to do it, and it's probably going to be a tougher trip on this occasion. So I don't want to take a short price on him against this kind of field. I won't be surprised when he wins, but I don't really want to bet on him in this race. So I have to see how I want to do this in the pick five, and I'll probably come to a conclusion by the end. But this is the race that I think I would lean towards trying to narrow down quite a bit. Let's move on to the 10th race, and boy, it's not an easy way to end this sequence. It is an Arkansas bred optional claiming 25,000 N1X allowance, really mostly just an N1X allowance because I think very few are in for the tag in here, for the fillies and mares going 6 furlongs. And Craig, these are tough races to handicap because I'm not following the Arkansas bred circuit year in and year out. And these horses just aren't that familiar to me, and it's watching a lot of replays, trying to gauge the relative quality of races. I think you can look at the TimeformUS race rating tool to help you along with that a little bit, and I definitely try to rely on that a little bit in these races, and just kind of note that this race gets a preliminary TimeformUS race rating of 93, which if you're using the TimeformUS PPs, you get that number from the race conditions right at the top of the screen in that oval. And then you can compare the race ratings to the other horses that have run in their past performances to the race that they're in today. So I try to do that a little bit, but it's still tough to come to solid conclusions in a race where you got so many horses that last raced at Oaklawn Park last winter or spring or coming off a layoff, haven't met this kind of competition, even if they've been running recently. So it's a tough one to figure out.
It is. And these are the kind of races where I think the inclination is to spread. I'm probably going to go in a different direction. And it's because this is the kind of race I could very well spread and still miss. I could use 5 or 6 or 7 horses in here and be wrong. I mean, there's 12 horses, and it was tough to eliminate all but maybe a couple of them. So this is a race where personally I'm going to trust the pace projector. I do think the pace will heat up. We have it listed as a fast pace, and these often do because $140,000 for Arkansas breds. They don't get this opportunity very often. It's for one, the Oaklawn meet, it's getting longer, but it's still less than half the year, or maybe right at half the year. And they don't write a ton of these races, which is why they always draw these full fields. So given that, I kind of defaulted to the late pace ratings, and not just the pace ratings. Once I saw them, I went and looked at the horses in there, and I wound up landing on the horses with the 2 best late pace ratings. The 7-horse Rivercrest Girl, who ran some decent races here at Remington Park this fall, has speed figures that fit. I think had some real excuses last time in a race that was just a merry-go-round at 7 furlongs in the slop, had no chance, was in the slop before that, routed. I just think this is a place where she's going to get an ideal spot and a kind of an ideal trip, assuming the track stays fast. And I think she's got a good shot if the pace does heat up. And the other one at half the price of her is the 8 Amazing Debate, right to her outside. She's been running in Louisiana. She's running these Arkansas bred races before last year at the end of last winter, but she seems to have become a new horse. She's getting better. She's run second 3 times in a row, so she doesn't win a ton, but it just seems like a place where she could find the winner circle here if the pace sets up for her. So that's how I'm handling this one. Just going to try to keep it short because, like I said, I could stab around in here and pick a bunch of horses and still miss.
Yeah, it's a really tough race, and I'm kind of glad that we landed on at least one of the same horses in here, Craig. I agree about the pace, especially given the presence of 2 horses. The number 4, Timbavati, who just seems like she's got to go to the lead to have a chance. And I don't totally trust her to get the kind of setup that she needs in this race. And the number 6, One Way or Another, who ran a lot better than it looks last time, where she got engaged with another horse who was a much shorter price than her, just running off in the front end, those 2 dueling far ahead of the field, and she fell apart. The other horse, I believe, was 9-5, was Condiment Girl, who was cost the victory by One Way or Another. She faded to 3rd. But with those 2 in the race, feels like things are going to heat up a little bit. One of them is ridden by Julian Leparoux, so I guess we can't be too confident that he's going to go to the lead. But I mean, it just feels like even there are some others that want to be forward, even if they're not outright need the lead front runner. So I could see this one coming apart a little bit. And I also think Rivercrest Girl is pretty interesting. At first glance, she probably does look like more of a router, or even a deep closing turf router. But as you said, when you start to look through her races a little bit more, what chance did she have last time going 7 furlongs in that race with no pace, where the speed held up in the slop? And her early 6 furlong dirt races were just before she got good. And yeah, she eventually improved going 2 turns, but I don't mind the turn back for her, especially in a race with pace. She ran well at Oaklawn Park last year. I don't know if she can repeat that 92 Timeform US speed figure that she ran when she blew out a field by 16 lengths in a very weak claiming race for the Arkansas breds. But still, she at least has the prior form on the dirt to be competitive in here, and I think she's supposed to get the right kind of setup. So I agree that she's interesting. Amazing Debate was a tough call for me because she really got good at Louisiana Downs and Delta Downs. And if you kind of just forget those races for a sec, she's supposed to be 30-1 in here based on her prior form at Oaklawn. And I I just don't know what to believe with her. I mean, maybe she's gonna carry that form from Delta, from Louisiana to Oaklawn, but I don't totally trust it, and I'm really not sure what to do with her. This barn did once upon a time, I think, send out a big priced winner at Oaklawn, but hasn't had as much success in recent years. So if she's a short price here, I kind of wanted to look elsewhere, and I kind of wanted to veer away from a few short prices. The one that I would respect, that is, I think, maybe going to be the favorite in this race is the number 12, Fly Like the Wind. She is one of those that's coming off a layoff here, but she goes out for a barn in Brett Calhoun that can win off a layoff. And she did not get a great trip last time when she tried that Rainbow Mistakes and just her fourth career start. She was off a bit slowly. It's not noted. I don't know if it's noted in the TimeformUS Trouble line, but in the short line, it's not. But I mean, she was steadied at the start and was really compromised at the beginning of that race, and actually had to make a big backstretch move to rush up into contention. I wouldn't say she so much had traffic at the quarter pole and that she was just kind of getting a good trip up to that point after the poor start. Once she peeled out in the stretch, she never changed leads, was just kind of hanging on her left lead late, and it probably cost her a placing in that spot. She had run well in her 2 starts prior to that, and as a 3-year-old who's now had some time away, returning as a more mature horse, if somebody's ready to take a step forward in here, I think it's probably going to be her, and she's going out for connections that I trust in a race where it's hard to have faith in a lot of these horses. So I think she's kind of solid in this race. And even though she has speed, at least she's drawn outside of all of the other speed that's going to be gunning forward to her inside. So I like her and the number 7 Rivercrest Girl a little bit, but I want to throw out one other horse that's going to be a big price that I think might get overlooked in this race. And that's the number 10 Music Mistress. She broke her maiden going this distance at Oaklawn at a huge price, 63-1 last April, actually showing speed that day. After that, didn't run well against winners. Went to Louisiana Downs and was beaten by Amazing Debate there, who obviously was improving at that track. Her last race, though, in August, I think is worth a watch in the replay booth. I mean, she was off a little bit slowly, was towards the back of the pack, and just her rider, I don't know if what was going on, but just wasn't really asking her for any run. Just even at the top of the stretch was just kind of sitting on her. And once she kind of realized that she had a chance to do better in that race and set her down to the final eighth of a mile, she was really finishing best of all, and kind of felt like if she had had a more heads up ride in that race, she might have actually won at a big price in that spot. Now she's coming off a bit of a layoff, going back to Arkansas Bred Company, like the horse to the outside, just a 3-year-old who's fairly lightly raced with upside. And I think she showed last time that she's got the versatility to get the right kind of trip closing in a race that features some speed. So at a big price, she's one that I definitely want to include pretty prominently.
Yeah, I was going to say if I was going to use another closer, it would be her. Her late pace rating doesn't reflect it because she hasn't really shown that style very often. She's more often been up close to the pace, but yeah, see, the word I would use would be a more energetic ride, because it seemed like they were just out for a stroll until they realized this horse actually had something that day, and it was just way too late. So I've got no problem with Music Mister. If I could afford her, I would put her as my third horse on the ticket.
And Craig, I don't. This is a race where we'll see if there are scratches. It's so wide open. I'll just say I don't want to fall into the trap of just ignoring horses that I would have otherwise used just because they're drawn on the AE list. And I do think this is a race where you want to take a long look at the 13 and 14 because they are far from impossible in this race. And sometimes the AEs that get into races like this do get somewhat overlooked by the bettors, especially in a pick five sequence. Chai Tea, I don't love her quite as much. I don't totally trust the Thistledown and Prairie Meadows form, but she does have a number of speed figures that put her in the mix. But the horse that I think is really interesting on the AE list is the number 14, Hot Springs Bling, who, when you look at her race ratings compared to everybody else in this field, she's the one horse you could point to that's getting some significant class relief. She's been in tougher spots than this, and I know she's been big prices quite a bit recently, going out for a barn that probably isn't going to take that much money. But she's got some back speed figures that give her a shot in here. And even when she was competing against Arkansas breds at Oaklawn Park last season, those were tougher races than this, higher allowance levels or stakes races. So I don't want to sleep on her or really either of these AEs if they get into the race and our prices. And it's just another complicating factor in a sequence that already is not easy.
Yeah, this is one we won't know till Saturday morning. I'm glad you brought them up because they're both horses who would be contenders. They're both double digits on the morning line. Now, I don't know how much went into the morning line, being that they are AEs, but they have the speed figures, and both of them like to come from off the pace, which I think we both agree could be the where you want to be in a race like this.
Yeah, tough way to end the sequence. Well, Craig, let's go back and recap how we're feeling about a few of these races and if we can even put together a pick five play. It's not going to be easy. And I think, like you said, there are a few races where if you're just feeling like you're wanting to use every horse, you're probably better off narrowing things down a little bit and just trying to distill these races down to your very best opinion or the horse that you think is going to be the best value and just taking a shot and trying to go with that horse that you think is going to make the sequence pay. And if you're right about the horse, you're set up to potentially make a score, but not trying to just use 4 or 5 horses in every leg and hoping to be right about some races that you don't have a strong field for. That's often not the best way to play these sequences.
No, that's a way to almost guarantee it'll chalk out when, at least in my experience. Not that I've never really played tickets like that, but I've seen a lot of tickets posted where people just spread, and then it winds up chalking out, and you wind up just not making very much money, if any. So I prefer to keep the tickets fairly narrow. In that first race, that maiden special for 2-year-old fillies, I'm mostly going to stick to the 9 and 10, probably exclusively. I think they're by far the two most likely winners. I prefer the 9 a little more than I do the 10. So if there's a chance to separate them a little, I might like make one an A and one a B. But I would say probably all of my play is going to go through them. In the maiden race for older horses, the 3-year-olds, I'm not going to use the Brad Cox horse. I just, there's too many negatives for me. And if he beats me, he beats me. It's just the way it goes. He's going to be a short price, I would think. I doubt you'd even get the 3-1 morning line. So I looked at a couple others, mainly focusing on the 6 and the 7. David Jacobson, he shows up at Oaklawn ready to run, as we've seen already this meet. Norm Cassie does well off the layoff. His horse fits as well. The 9 Pineland, I'm a little torn on. You sold me a little bit on the 8. That one would probably be a B. If the 6 and 7, Mr. Keating and Excellent Men are A's, I could use the 8 Wicked again as a B type in there. The other allowance race, or the open allowance race, and N2X, I actually like a couple prices in there. Well, XL, I definitely like quite a bit. He's a big price, 20-1. He'd still be an A for me. Count the Monet would be another one I would use. And then Shoot as well, because I just think there's too many positives for him. And that would probably be about it for me. In the stakes race, 2 horses for me, Seize the Night and Dennington. That would be it. I think that race is going to come apart a bit. Those are the 2 most likely to be picking up the pieces. So keeping it kind of short in that one. And then the Arkansas bred race, as I mentioned, I'm looking for horses coming from off the pace. The two best late pace ratings were Rivercrest Girl, who is the one I prefer the most. Amazing Debate is another. And then I would keep an eye on the AEs as well. And I wouldn't totally dismiss the horse you mentioned either, Music Mistress. I would use her more as a B or C type.
So the way I'm going to go about this sequence, and it's kind of, I think, the way that I have to do it, just given my opinions, is I'm going to have to single a horse, which I don't often love to do. I think like the where's your single debate is a bit of a crutch for some players that try to put these tickets together. When I think trying to put together a more nuanced layering of tickets is often a better strategy. But in this one, just given the way these races are shaping up, I want to single Seize the Night, the 3 in the stakes race. I don't really like anybody else that much in that race, and I really think this horse is sitting on a good effort. So he's my single, and we'll build basically a pick 4 ticket around that. In the 6th race to open things up, this one is just tough for me to narrow down, and I'm not going to try too hard to do it. I'm going to use the 7 through 10, Midshipman's Dance, the Big Calhouna, the 2 firsters, as well as the 2 logical horses with experience, Cleopatra Celine and Bang Bang Fury. I'm not going to try to split hairs. I think that the 9 and 10 are the most likely to win, but I think those 2 firsters are pretty interesting, and I just want to have coverage to all of them. In the 7th race, I will lean mostly on Mr. Keating and Wicked Again. I just think that they're the 2 most likely winners of this race. Wicked Again's got those figures, like the turn back, and Mr. Keating just seems to have that upside off the layoff. And the more we talk about it, Craig, I'm kind of leaning towards your viewpoint with Raging, the first-time starter. Probably not great value in a sequence where you really do have to hunt for the value to make this ticket affordable. So I'm probably going to ultimately downgrade him. And if I'm using a C in this race, I'd be more likely to make it the number 2, Miller's Right, who I think is going to be a much better price and has some of the same things to like as Wicked Again. So that's a race where the more we talk about it, I'm probably going to try to narrow it down a little more than I was initially thinking. In the 8th race, it's really tough. I'm going to try to narrow things down, even though I don't have the strongest feel for this race, to horses that I just think will be the right prices. And I think the horse that's going to be the best value of those that I like is the number 1, Navy Seal. So I definitely want to have him as an A on my tickets. The number 5, Shooter Shoot, who I think is very logical, not going to be as great a price, but I just think fits this race really well. And then the 9, Armagnac, who I don't fully trust, but I'm not going to be surprised when he wins this race at 6 or 7 to 1, because he certainly has the quality to do it. We'll just see what we get from him off the layoff. But I wanted to downgrade horses like Nautical Star and Stayed In for Half, who look super obvious and are going to take money in here. And I just couldn't find quite enough to latch onto with either of them to swallow what I think is going to be bad value in a sequence where I really want to be prioritizing the horses that are going to give me that better expected value. Like I said, I'm singling in the Tinsel Stakes, the number 3, Seize the Night. And then to close it out, I since I'm trying to narrow things down a little bit earlier, I'm going to use a few horses in this very complicated finale. Those would be the number 7, Rivercrest Girl, the number 10, Music Mistress, the number 12, Fly Like the Wind, and then either of the number 13 or 14, if they get in, I'd be more likely to use the number 14 in a higher place or a higher tier of my wager, a Hot Springs Bling, since I think that she fits this race a little bit better. But I do want to keep an open mind with regard to those AEs in the last race and keep things flexible in case the complexion of that race changes a little bit. Even if some of the speed scratches out, I think you have to rethink things a bit. And that takes us to the end of the sequence, Craig. Not the easiest one to handicap. I think this podcast probably went a little bit longer than some of our recent ones, but a lot of ground to cover here.
Yeah, I may need a nap after that one. That was a good one. Not just actually doing the show, but the handicapping part was pretty extensive. So tough sequence, but if I'm not mistaken, this is going to be our last one for a while. Am I correct in that?
Yes, we will. I'm glad you mentioned that, Craig. We'll be taking a break after this. Craig and I, the podcast, will put it on hiatus until about probably the first week in January. We'll come back for maybe a pace cast and a forecast that week. We'll put something out on Twitter when we decide exactly when the next Timeform US podcast is going to be. But yeah, slow weeks towards the end of the year, so we're not going to bother to do the pace cast for the 2 weeks that end December, and we'll also just take some time off. I'm going to be off for the final week of the year anyway, and I know Craig, I don't think you mind me saying at this point that you're going to cover the morning line for a week in New York. So just given all of that going on, we're going to delay getting the next few podcasts out.
Yes, I will ask that people be nice to me, particularly Andy Serling. When I'm doing the morning line, I do the best I can. I don't know the New York connections quite as well as David, though I do follow the circuit regularly and watch every day. But hopefully, I think I did better the second time than the first, and hopefully it goes a little better this time as well, because it's not an easy job. And just as we close out the year, I want to say what a great job you do with the morning line. I know you get plenty of praise online, and it's well deserved.
Oh, well, I really appreciate you saying that, Craig, and I appreciate doing these podcasts with you every week. It's always nice to kind of reset and get somebody else's opinion to shake things up, or just have that conversation about the races every week. And I really enjoy putting these together with you, and I hope people enjoy listening to them. And our producers, Lucia and Chloe, who do all of our excellent videos every week, putting together graphics and coordinating our schedules, that with Dan and Mike, as well as Ashley, everybody else who does the videos and also does the production on these podcasts. Big thanks to them for putting in the hours to make all of this media available to you on DRF's YouTube channel and our other channels. And I know they shared some stats about how these podcasts have performed this year, and it's just nice to know that that people listen, and that people make a point to tune into our podcast and have it marked as one of their favorites. And that's really nice for us to hear and rewarding.
Yeah, very much so. I really appreciate everybody that listens. I love all the comments we get about the shows, whether we do well or do poorly. It's going to happen. It's horse racing, but I love hearing from everybody out there. I know we both engage quite a bit on social media, and I just, I know we're two guys that love horse racing and really almost never get tired of talking about it.
I couldn't have said it better, Craig. I completely agree with that. Well, everybody, thanks for tuning into these podcasts in 2023. I wish, and I'm sure Craig does as well, everybody a happy holiday season and happy new year. And we'll be back in 2024 to discuss a lot more racing. Have a good holiday, everybody.